I'm Stacy. I'm a marketing manager at Purolator, and I'll be your host for today. I'm going to introduce you to today's speakers. We're very happy to have Ramsey Mansour, who is the Vice President of Corporate Strategy and Marketing at Purolator. He's an executive business leader with 20 years of domestic and international experience in B2B and B2C marketing and supply chain logistics. We'll also have Chris Hall, who's the head of marketing at Zencraft. He's spent the last decade developing marketing strategies that drive results for clients. He specializes in providing insight into customer service and process optimization to both SMB and enterprise businesses. Zencraft has created an app that allows Salesforce users to create shipments and returns using just a few clicks, which is integrated with Purolator. We're very excited to have both speakers. I'm going to turn it over to Ramsey to get started.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much, Stacy, and thanks to everybody for attending. This is really our first foray in a series of webinars that we're going to be hosting this year. And given the interest that we experienced with this particular webinar, we think that we're on the right track. And the interest really exceeded our expectations. So, given the fact that we're in the early stages of this year, it's really a pleasant surprise to see lots of people looking to get a head start. So let's get started with the webinar. So in terms of defining peak, peak season for us and others typically hovers around the holidays, and it tends to be that time when all our collective capacities are really stretched to the limits. And it can be pretty daunting because it exposes certain stress points in the chain. It can create a lot of challenges for us and our customers, and especially if it's not very well planned. And conversely, it can also showcase us at our best. And for as far as I can remember, I know that planning for peak has always been a challenge, especially when it comes to balancing demand and capacity to drive the best possible customer experience for our consumers. And peak really affects everyone in the chain. It's not just the carriers. And in the world of B2B, demand and capacity planning has traditionally been, fairly and somewhat predictable in terms of flows and timing. But e-commerce and with the advent of growth of B2C, it's really made it even more challenging with wilder swings in volume. And so demand and capacity planning has really become a lot less predictable for all of us. So, in terms of getting it right, we know that the benefits are fairly significant. And if we're collectively able to manage the flow of demand, we can ultimately enhance that customer experience, which leads to an elevated brand and augmenting sales performance. So when it comes to final mile delivery, the world continues to evolve. And what you see above really represents table stakes for the overall retail experience. And in this world, complexity is fairly low. Demand is relatively predictable. It can be based on historical averages. Destinations are fairly fixed. Timing and flow is generally well understood. And forecasts were typically reliable, or they could be adjusted quickly. And peak was a relatively repeatable and predictable event. So the biggest fundamental change is really kind of the evolution of the receiver behind all these shipments. In B2C, the receiver, as we all know, is the end consumer. And now consumer expectations differ significantly from businesses. They're more spontaneous, they're more mobile, they're way more demanding, and they demand a lot more flexibility. And more purchase decisions are evaluated by the overall experience. And experiences they're really not shy about sharing. So getting it right for all of us has become even more vital. And as B2C expectations start to expand to B2B, the lines are going to blur even more. And omni-channel will soon become that anywhere to anywhere proposition. And internally, we often refer to that as X to X, and not so much a B2B or B2C experience, but it's all seemingly coming together into one unified experience that'll cross over all types of businesses and experiences. And we're really starting to see these patterns emerge in our own business. So you've probably seen this sort of depiction several times when it comes to the omni-channel experience, perhaps with a few minor variations. It's typically a headshot in the middle surrounded by, many tools and access channels, and the headshot's typically that of the customer, who's kind of in the center of all our intentions. And while the illustration conveys the many devices that are typically used in an omni-channel experience, I think what I'd like to point out are that these elements are in no way fixed or static. In e-commerce, we know that consumers want control over the execution of the shopping experience for both delivery and also for returns. But they also expect that experience is seamless across platforms and across devices. And we've also discovered that, especially these days, the consumer is constantly in motion. Therefore, a fixed definition of or network doesn't really accurately describe the evolution of omnichannel. And our job really is to make that experience consistent across all the touch points. And so all these devices have to be flexible and nimble and always in motion to make up for the needs or to account for the needs of the end consumer. And ultimately, friction, or how it is to buy or how hard we make it for them to buy or have something delivered or returned, does become the enemy of conversion or growth, retention, and ultimately customer satisfaction. So I'm going to take a bit of a pause, and this, I think I'll turn it over to Stacy to bring us our very first poll question.
Yes, we're going to do a quick poll today at this point in time. So it is, which alternate delivery options do your customers prefer the most when they're not at home? So we want your opinion on this. Is it shipping company's retail location, shipping to the company's terminal location, mall pickup, in-store pickup, or locker boxes? I'll just give a couple of seconds for people to vote, and I'll close the poll. Well, some really interesting results coming through.
Yeah. Seemingly the lead horse right now is the shipping company's retail location. So that's interesting.
All right, so we're going to close the poll and share the results. So it looks like 41% say in-store pickup service and 25% say shipping to company's retail location, with company's terminal location being the third option. It's really interesting information from everyone.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for participating in the poll. There'll be a few more questions coming up. So this takes us to our next point. While shipping decisions and rules are often and traditionally established by the sender or the shipper, the expectations and assessment around the entire customer and delivery experience is really firmly established and set by the receiver. It may not be explicit, but it's there. And so, what does that mean? Well, it changes the rules a bit, at least for us. The partnership between carrier and shipper in serving the receiver is actually more crucial now than it's ever been. And with a receiver that's consistently experience-driven and constantly in motion, it means increased demands for things like service flexibility, which are more and more services and delivery options, greater speed or increased speed, including premium time and day-definite services, being more assured of when the package is going to get there. More convenience and more on their terms, including door-to-door and flexible delivery options, just like the poll question that we just surfaced a little while ago. And then higher levels of visibility. Where's my package at every stage in the chain? And providing that information in real time so you don't have to get all those calls at the phone center. And then finally, greater demand for on-time performance. In essence, matching the experience with the expectation and keeping our collective promises. So serving the receiver isn't just about putting them in the driver's seat, though. It's about clearing the path. It's about making that ride as smooth as possible and making sure we avoid the many bumps, the detours, and the potholes they may encounter along the way. Consumers do not want to jump through a whole bunch of hoops to get their package and to get their online order. They went online to enjoy that convenience of the experience, and they want that fulfillment and delivery experience to manage that sort of expectation and experience. They don't want that process to be broken. Which takes us to one of the important aspects of the overall experience, which is on-time delivery performance. And as an organization, the desire to serve the receiver really drove our decision during peak season. And we had to make a crucial decision on our service guarantees. And what we established that it was really more important to maintain those service guarantees even during our busiest shopping and shipping season because of that expectation. And at the time, we recognized that the on-time performance was really at the core of the delivery experience, and that we were an extension of all the retailers that were using us for their services. So it's all about setting that right expectation around timing for delivery, providing updates, as I mentioned before, and being notified about the status along the way. And this has really become the minimum requirement for a positive customer and delivery experience. And executed properly, and we can certainly expect a repeat shopper who's confident in our ability to collectively and consistently execute, which will lead to that increase in loyalty, less calls and less complaints, repeat sales, and so on, which is a pretty good segue to the next topic. So over the years, we've heard a lot about free shipping, and free shipping promotions certainly fueled growth in kind of what I'd call that slow and sensible economical shipping option, because the economics would certainly drive consumers to those types of services. And at that time, there was a strong sense, even for us, that consumers were willing to trade speed for price, and there was a lot of truth to that. But that sentiment is now beginning to change. Today, consumers' expectations are shifting. They're quickly, maybe even quietly, raising the bar. And according to this Deloitte study of consumer trends, only 35% of the respondents consider 3 to 4 day shipping as being fast, whereas more than half, about 54%, define fast as 2 days or less. So these expectations are shifting, they're changing, and consumers are being more demanding for sure. But the day of delivery that we're seeing kind of behind this sort of research is really just the starting point. We're also observing greater demand for flexible delivery options, in particular nights, weekends, same day, and a wider array of delivery services, even beyond time and day definite. So consumers are continuing to raise their expectations for speed when it comes to these online purchases. And it is more than speed. It is that desire for greater flexibility in the overall experience. So I'll turn it back over to Stacy for our next poll.
Yeah, it's a perfect time for our second poll, which is, what do you think is the most important delivery option for your customers when it comes to online purchases? So is it order online, pick up in store, same day delivery, next day delivery, 2 to 3 day, or evening and weekend? What are you hearing from your customers? Just give a few seconds for people to vote. A lot. Oh,
it's close.
Yeah, very close one.
There's a three-way race on this one.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll. And we have the results are very close between next day delivery and 2 to 3 day, with evening and weekend delivery coming in a close third.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And certainly from a product development perspective, this is really good and valuable information for us. So thank you. Okay, so, and I think what we've been seeing in the market is that, retailers, have been very accommodating at trying all types of and all kinds of flexible delivery options, whether it means providing in-store pickup or scheduling pickups for a later date, holding the product in the store, or partnering with others to provide solutions like locker boxes and so on. And when you look at the charts and the stats that are in front of us, one thing becomes really clear to me, and that is there's still a lot of work to be done. And when it comes to finding the ideal solution, for everyone, there doesn't appear to be, a clear winner. While in-store pickup looks very favorable, when you look at what's implemented and working well, the numbers aren't really that high. So, going back to our previous point regarding the omni-channel delivery experience, I think this clearly states that the consumer is always in motion. So therefore, we're not really going to find that one-size-fits-all solution to the challenge of keeping up with their expectations. And ultimately, the final mile network beyond the home may actually be less fixed and perhaps even more mobile, which takes us to our holiday mobile quick stop solution, which was for Purolator essentially a pilot that was met with very strong reviews from customers and consumers who used the service. It was flexible, it was nimble, it was mobile. It ultimately drove convenience for online shoppers who really wanted to pick up their packages in a location that suited them and not the other way around. And in a nutshell, the quick stop really provided convenience, it provided flexibility to that consumer who's constantly in motion looking for that omni-channel overall experience. And we had some pretty good reviews for the truck, mostly remarking about the convenience and the fact that we opened up on Saturdays, that we contacted customers to let them know about the truck and their packages being ready for pickup. We provided extra signage to assist customers to make sure they knew where the truck was. And we even added a donation box to support our Tackle Hunger initiative, which for us lined up really nicely with the holiday theme. So, in essence, we were really able to provide a solution that met their needs and on their terms. So it stands to reason that with consumers becoming more and more conditioned to order products online, and with more of them skipping the mall these days, we can also expect greater returns following peak. And so the planning process for both are linked. One really drives the other. And if there's anything that we've observed kind of very early in 2018 was the surge in activity for online e-commerce through the latter months of the year drove retail activity very early this year. So what you see here is a study depicting consumer expectations regarding returns, and they're pretty intuitive and they are relevant when it comes to peak planning and demand forecasting. And basically it shows that 42% of shoppers look at a retailer's return policy before buying. 40% of them would stop shopping online with the retailer if their returns were slow. And about 46% of them abandoned an online shopping cart because the retailer didn't offer free return shipping. So I think the message here is to make sure we consider returns processes as part of planning for peak, because it follows very closely thereafter. So let's make sure that we kind of hit both at the same time. So at this point, we've described peak season and maybe in very graphical ways, but now let's take a look at it in terms of how it looks like on charts. So here's the interesting part, especially if you like numbers. And I think these charts provide a pretty good view of both the size and the length of peak season. And if you look at the monthly view to the left, you could see some of these seasonal peaks at various points and intervals in the year, and then a more significant ramp up in the latter part of the year. Now, of course, for us, there's still a lot of B2B volume in this mix. So there are various peaks throughout the year, depending on seasonal fulfillment and stock replenishments that occur throughout. But when you go to the right and you start looking at that daily view, a few things start to become really apparent. One is there's a lot of peaks and a lot of valleys. And the peaks are fairly pronounced, and they build up and they also continue to rise throughout the quarters, particularly as you get closer to the end of the year. And then the final peaks actually end up getting wider. And if you're curious, it's really Mondays that are clearly, where we're clearly seeing the greatest rise in volume, since a lot of consumers are typically shopping on weekends. So this is certainly the reality in 2017, as peak for us really started in mid-September, which was a bit early, with a long and heavy retail ramp-up period as time went on. And now the closer you get to mid-September, of course, the heavier the B2B concentration and activity as we start to see sort of inventory stock-ups and replenishments kicking into gear. But let's zoom in a little bit more. So now we're looking at activity for November and December. And again, if you compared this to previous years, what we observed here was a peak season that was earlier, it was longer, it was more protracted and spread out. Now, there's clearly a steady climb in demand, kind of if you look to the left, until a week and a half before Black Friday. And this is when consumers really start to hold back on their shopping as they wait for some sales and promotions to kick in. And then we start to see B2B shipping activities start to climb on the Wednesday before Black Friday through these fulfillments and stock replenishments. And then boom, things really start happening on Cyber Monday when online shipping ramps up quickly. And that doesn't really fade that much until the following Tuesday. So the Cyber Monday phenomenon really morphed into Cyber Week because it extended beyond a day. So perhaps both consumers and retailers are shifting the demand that used to come from Boxing Week to well before the 25th. So it's carrying that demand forward, and that's where you start to see the tapering off after the 25th, because it then starts to drop off except for a few more blips. And we see them as we approach the 25th, when we start to see some last minute deals and shoppers come into play. Now, from a product mix perspective, this is also where we start to see a lot more demand for our time and day definite services, to make sure that gifts make it on time. So, which now takes us to our next poll question, Stacy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So our next poll question is: on what day do you fulfill the majority of your online orders? Is it Mondays, over the weekends, on Fridays, Tuesday to Thursday, or don't really know? And I'll just give a couple of seconds for people to vote. Oh, seeing an interesting mix. We've got a good three-way tie for first. I'm going to close the poll.
Yeah, and that's fairly representative of the chart, because we saw spikes in Mondays and some Tuesdays, so that looks very much in line.
Mm-hmm. Fulfillment all week.
All right, so I found this was an interesting graphic here. So just as a point of interest, here's, I think, a really great map that shows the distribution of the volume and volume increases that we saw throughout Canada in terms of year-over-year growth. Now, I guess the key point here is that e-commerce growth in Canada is really not as concentrated as some would surmise. Certainly, what I perhaps surmised, and it's fairly distributed into many markets, making service coverage and reach a really important factor to consider. So again, an interesting points of fact here in terms of that distribution. Thought we'd share it with you. So I'm getting close to the end here. So as I near the end of the segment, a few key takeaways. Firstly, we talked about the importance of an omni-channel experience. It's continuing to be redefined, and there's an increased demand that we're seeing for convenience, speed, visibility, reliability, and mobility as the consumer continues to evolve their buying patterns. Last mile delivery continues to shift, and it's reshaping e-commerce in Canada in many interesting ways. And as I mentioned before, there really isn't a silver bullet out there. I think if anything, it's going to be an array of solutions to address these evolving consumer needs. The third point, I think, is success during the holidays or peak season isn't just about planning out the volumes coming out of distribution centers and stores, but also plan for that boomerang effect that comes with returns that follow peak season. And then, finally, peak season's getting longer. It's also getting earlier, and it's becoming more complex, which is, in a way, the essence of what this webinar is all about. And then I'm going to show you a statistic as I close out my section. But before we do that, we've got another poll from Stacy.
One more poll.
Oh, Stacy's got lots of questions.
I have lots of questions today. So when will or did you already start preparing for 2018 holiday season? Do you plan during Q1, Q2, Q3, or are you last minute during Q4? I'll just give a couple seconds for people to respond. Good variety here. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results with you. If I can close the poll.
There you go.
All right, so we have 12% of people who are starting right now to
Good
prep.
for you. Good for you.
Which sounds like, from what Ramsey said, peak starting in September, sounds like you should probably get started now. 16% April, May, or June, 35 in Q3, and 29 during Q4 itself.
Yeah, so I think again that's fairly representative of our own survey. So you can see kind of the lion's share happening also in July, August, and September from our own research. So as Stacy said, and I think the general theme of this webinar, planning for peak is really never too early. We've polled a lot of our retail customers, and we've also noticed and noted that more and more of them have began their planning well before the season arrived. And as you can see here, 43% of respondents started their planning even in the summer months. And from what we saw, there were really three main factors that drove this early planning. One was to keep up with rising overall demand from consumers. So healthy economy, greater demand, making sure that they were getting ahead of these growing demands from consumers. They also wanted to make sure that their products made it to the shelves and into the hands to their consumers on time. So avoiding stockouts and things of that nature. And then finally, others were saying that they adjusted their planning because online shopping has created so many new, dynamic, and complex consumer buying patterns that they just felt like they needed to get ahead of the curve. And now this year, we'll probably end up doing the same survey, and we expect the percentages around the earlier months are probably going to get larger. And if the attendance and interest in this webinar is any indication, then that's likely a forecast that you could bank on. So just a couple of takeaways, a few takeaways to close here before I turn it over to Chris. And there's more, of course, there's a lot of content in this webinar, but there's more to peak planning than forecasting volumes and trying to understand consumer demands and omni-channel experiences. One is, got to understand the various capabilities that are out there and how to best take advantage of them. And what comes to mind are so many delivery options and final mile services that are available to you. So that's one, and as well as return solutions. Two is take every opportunity to integrate technology, and sooner rather than later, to ensure you're providing that seamless and frictionless experience for consumers. They begin their experiences shopping online. Those experiences are seamless and frictionless. I mean, the fulfillment, distribution, transportation, and final mile needs to feel the same way. And to that end, making sure that coordinating with sales and operations teams of the carriers to optimize things like pickup and delivery processes to ensure that you avoid hiccups and surprises during the busiest time of the year, and nobody likes surprises. And then finally ensuring that returns augment the overall customer experience. They don't necessarily take away from it. So I think if there were 4 key takeaways that I wanted to leave with you, those would be the ones. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris to take us through the next section of our content. Thank you.
Before we turn it over to Chris, just a reminder to enter your questions in the question or chat section directed to Team Purolator.
Hi everybody. Thank you, Stacey, and thank you, Ramsey, for letting me on the call. As Ramsey mentioned, I'm going to be talking about how technology can be used to help a retailer with their returns policy, and how the flexibility of a retailer's returns policy can actually mean the difference between retaining a customer and losing them even before they've actually made their initial purchase. But first, a little background as to why this is actually so important. The number of people shopping throughout January after the holiday season, as Ramsey mentioned, continues to rise, and shops both offline and online are taking advantage of this by offering great sales and great bargains for even after the holiday seasons have ended. And this leads kind of really well onto the second statistic, rather than actually buying a gift for somebody, a lot of people are actually thinking of gift cards for their friends and family, so they can buy exactly what they want rather than having that awkward situation where their loved one will be not really happy with what they're actually receiving. So gift cards are becoming much, much more important. And with so many people actually shopping online, I think Ramsey mentioned earlier, around $40 billion is spent every year. And that number is continuing to grow with a huge emphasis being put on days such as Cyber Monday and, of course, Black Friday. The pressure on retailers to improve their returns policy will grow as well. Depending on the category as well, on some categories, things like apparel, up to 30% of products are actually returned when they're bought online in the US. And of course, this statistic also rings very true in Canada. This is usually obviously because customers haven't actually had the chance to see the product or even just even touch the product, feel the product before buying it. So they don't know whether it fits or if it's the right actual color. So not only that, but it's also important as a retailer to make sure that your returns policy is really clear. And this, as Ramsey mentioned a minute ago, comes down to the overall shopping experience for the customer. And a lot of websites who hide their returns policy in terms and conditions seem to be actually losing customers to those who actually display it there. Actually, a great example of this was recently I bought some business cards for Zencraft when I was going to a conference, and there was two websites I could have bought them from, and one didn't have a returns policy listed, and the other one actually just came up on the side when I was going to buy those business cards that there'll be a no quibble returns guarantee. So whether these business cards were returned, or sorry, whether they were misprinted or it wasn't what I was expecting, maybe the card was too thin, they take them back. So that was something I thought would be much more advantageous for myself. So I bought from them. The other website was actually cheaper, but I bought from those simply because if anything went wrong, I could just send them back. And obviously, I'll use those again rather than the other one as well. And of course, with many retailers this time offering one-click purchases and swift and simple returns, it's becoming increasingly important for companies to have a quick and simple returns policy. This is especially true if you can see these statistics now. The ease with which a return can be made could actually mean the difference between retaining a customer and actually losing them. So as you can see, 40% of customers will actually decide not to use a retailer again if they have a bad returns experience. And as we know, it costs between 5 and 25 times more to acquire a brand new customer than it does to retain an existing one. So actually, counterintuitively, rather than discouraging returns for fear of using money, it can actually pay a retailer to have a solid and simple returns policy, so that customer will come back and will spend that money again. And this kind of brings me on to how technology can be used to speed up your returns process. And at Zencraft, we realized that the need to keep delivery information and also customer information together inside your CRM, in our case, inside Salesforce. And by combining both, you're able to quickly and without error process returns, or even allow the customer self-service returns process. And by keeping this information together and not having to copy and paste, there's going to be no human error at all, which obviously will make your customers a lot happier. And of course, the time saving as well as the cost saving through the use of technology can allow retailers to have a much more flexible returns policy. And if you guys are on the Salesforce platform, then you'll be able to use Zencraft, a product like Zencraft, to automatically create a shipment and returns labels for your customers with just a few clicks. And of course, our integration and our partnership with Purelator, as Stacey mentioned earlier, means that retailers can book a shipment and print their Purelator label from inside their Salesforce platform, which obviously will be a huge time saver over manually copying and pasting into a website. So if we can get that to the next one.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks everybody for your attention today. We do have a couple of questions that came in. First, to address the map, because somebody asked where Newfoundland was. We had just grabbed the top growth areas in the country, and a lot of them happen to be the rural areas. Just an illustration, we absolutely deliver to Newfoundland and Labrador. In fact, I think our farthest moving package over the holiday season originated in Newfoundland. So our questions are one for Ramsey and one for Chris. So to Ramsey, do you feel that weekend delivery will become more important for customers moving forward?
Yeah, I think the quick answer to that one is yes. And you know, I mentioned earlier that consumers are looking for more and more a seamless and frictionless experience, and you know, the majority really prefer the convenience of having that package and their order delivered to their doorstep. And when they're not there, of course, you know, retail locations, terminal locations, locker boxes, those are good alternative solutions, but it doesn't really address the convenience and experience that the consumer is looking for. If they began their transaction online, they certainly, and not at a retail location, they would prefer not to end that transaction at a retail location, because otherwise they would have gone to the store. So expanding, I think, the array of delivery solutions to include nights and weekends is absolutely going to be where the shifts are going to occur. And I don't think that's going to change things in the B2B space, but I see that as a bit of a carve out for B2C e-commerce, just to make sure we're collectively satisfying the needs of that consumer.
Okay, thanks, Ramsey. And for Chris, what have you seen is the biggest pain point for your clients in terms of developing out the returns process?
Sure. A lot of people have found that actually it's mainly the speed and mainly being able to get a refund out to a customer as quickly as possible. So a lot of customers won't like receiving their refund after, say, 20 days, and a lot of them want to have their refund within 5, and preferably, as I've heard a few times, they want to have a cash refund as well. So using technology, using Salesforce with Zencraft, and of course, obviously partnering with Purolator, you can make sure that you get those that refund out as quickly as possible. So the customer is going to remain a lot happier, and you can try and hit that 5-day refund goal.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for attending today. As I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, we will be sending out the recorded version via email. If you have any questions about any of the content, please reach out to your Purolator representative. We'll be happy to put you in touch with the right people who can get you the answers and filter any questions through to Zencraft as well. As Ramsey mentioned, this is the first in a series of webinars that we'll be conducting this year. The next is scheduled for April 11th, and will be focused on blockchain, the evolution of security and transparency in logistics and supply chain. So it's a hot topic these days, and I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about this, so we're hoping to help give guidance on this topic. Thanks very much, everybody, for attending.